The Philosophy of Consciousism. Consciousism is the metaphysical framework that regards consciousness as the generative substrate of reality, time as consciousness's mode of experiencing itself, and matter as condensed information within consciousness. Consciousism begins from a single transforming insight. Consciousness is not an accidental feature of the cosmos, but its primary substance, its generative principle, and its living foundation. What we call reality is the self-presentation of awareness. Matter, energy, space, and time are not autonomous entities existing independently of experience. They are structured expressions of consciousness itself. The universe does not produce consciousness. The universe is produced within consciousness. This reversal of perspective transforms the central problem of philosophy. Instead of asking how inert matter gives rise to awareness, consciousism asks how awareness gives rise to the appearance of matter. The question of origins thus becomes internal rather than external. Consciousness is not located inside the universe as a private phenomenon of the brain. The universe is located within consciousness as one of its possible configurations. To exist, therefore, is to appear within awareness. Being and appearing are not two different events but one and the same act viewed from two angles, subjectively as experience, and objectively as manifestation. This claim does not deny the reality of the physical world. It redefines what real means. For the materialist, reality is that which exists independently of observation. For the consciousist, reality is that which is capable of being experienced, because experience is the only mode in which existence is known at all. Matter, then, is not negated. It is understood as condensed information within the field of consciousness. The solidity of the physical world is the stability of awareness crystallizing into coherent form. Philosophically, consciousism stands at the intersection of several traditions, yet belongs fully to none. It inherits from George Berkeley the conviction that being is inseparable from perception, from Edmund Husserl the insight that the world and consciousness are co-constituted, and from Advaita Vedanta the understanding that ultimate reality is pure awareness, or Brahman. Yet consciousism also departs from these lineages by articulating its vision in dialogue with modern science. It interprets the informational and relational models of quantum theory, relativity, and cognitive science not as threats to consciousness-based metaphysics, but as its empirical articulation. The discoveries of physics become, in this light, the language through which consciousness describes its own patterns of manifestation. The contrast between consciousism and materialism can be traced to two different intuitions about what is most fundamental. Materialism begins with the assumption that the universe is composed of mindless entities obeying impersonal laws, and that consciousness somehow emerges as an evolutionary byproduct. Consciousism begins with the opposite intuition, that awareness is the precondition of all law and form, and that what we call matter is one of the modes through which awareness experiences itself. Where materialism reduces mind to mechanism, consciousism elevates mechanism to expression, the language through which consciousness organizes its self-knowledge. This reframing also resolves several long-standing philosophical paradoxes. The so-called hard problem of consciousness, which asks how subjective experience arises from objective processes, becomes inverted. Consciousism holds that subjective experience does not arise from objectivity. Objectivity arises from the structuring of subjectivity. The world of measurable phenomena is consciousness viewed through the lens of differentiation, just as the world of thought and feeling is consciousness viewed through the lens of interiority. Both are aspects of a single field that has divided itself for the sake of self-recognition. Contemporary physics provides metaphoric confirmation of this principle. In quantum theory, observation plays a constitutive role. The act of measurement brings one among many possible states into actuality. Consciousism extends this pattern beyond laboratory physics into metaphysics itself. The entire cosmos is the wave function of awareness, a superposition of potential experiences continuously collapsing into actuality through the act of attention. The universe, in other words, is consciousness observing itself. Every moment of perception is a creative act that transforms possibility into form. The implications of this view are both scientific and existential. Scientifically, it invites a reinterpretation of physical law as the regular behavior of consciousness under self-consistent conditions. Phenomena that appear separate, mind and matter, subject and object, energy and information, are understood as variations within one continuum. Existentially, it implies that every act of knowing is an act of participation in the generative field of reality. Awareness is not a passive witness of an alien world, but the active principle through which worlds arise. To say that consciousness is primary is therefore not to retreat into idealism in its classical sense, where reality is reduced to thought or idea. Consciousism differs by refusing to collapse the world into abstraction. Instead, it treats consciousness as experiential presence, more concrete than matter itself, because all notions of matter presuppose it. Awareness is not a concept about reality, but the living reality in which all concepts, perceptions, and entities appear. It is not mental in the psychological sense, nor personal in the human sense. It is the luminous condition that makes both mind and matter possible. In this framework, reality is not divided between a subjective inner world and an objective outer one. Both are expressions of the same field of awareness differentiating itself through perspective. The subject perceives the object, and the object reflects the subject, in a continuous circuit of self-revelation. Consciousness is not contained within an individual mind. Rather, the individual mind is a local modulation within a universal consciousness. The private and the cosmic are two scales of the same event. Summarized in a single sentence, consciousism is the metaphysical framework that regards consciousness as the generative substance of reality, time as consciousness's experience of its own unfolding, and matter as condensed information within that unfolding. The cosmos is consciousness dreaming itself, and the human mind is a focal point through which that dream becomes self-aware. To understand consciousness is therefore not merely to solve a problem within philosophy of mind, but to approach the first principle of being itself, the living source from which the universe arises and into which it continually returns. Temporal-Subjection theory, the core metaphysics. If consciousness is the fundamental reality, then time cannot be understood as an independent dimension through which consciousness passes. It must instead be an aspect of consciousness itself, a mode of its activity. The Temporal-Subjection theory, or TST, provides this framework. It interprets time as the movement of awareness through its own field of potential, transforming what appears as objective succession into a process of subjective navigation. Time, in this view, is not the container of experience but the expression of consciousness experiencing itself in sequence. In the classical picture of science, time is conceived as an objective continuum. Events occur along a smooth coordinate axis within spacetime, governed by physical laws that remain constant regardless of the observer. Within this paradigm, consciousness is a passive witness of an already existing temporal order. TST reverses the perspective. Time does not unfold independently of awareness, it unfolds because awareness moves. The perception of motion, change, and duration arises from consciousness shifting its point of alignment within the infinite informational manifold that constitutes reality. The flow of time is therefore not in the universe, but in the act of observation itself. Every moment of awareness corresponds to a specific informational configuration within the universal field of potential. Consciousness, by selecting and integrating one configuration after another, generates the impression of temporal flow. The continuity we call time is the sequence of these acts of selection, much as a film projector creates the illusion of motion by displaying discrete frames in rapid succession. What we call the present is not a single instant sliding through an external timeline. It is the locus of awareness collapsing a range of possibilities into a coherent experience. In this sense, time is the ongoing act of consciousness differentiating potential into actuality. This perspective dissolves one of the great philosophical tensions concerning the nature of time. On the one hand, relativity and the block universe interpretation of physics suggests that all moments coexist within a timeless structure. On the other hand, lived experience insists upon the reality of temporal passage. Temporal-Subjection theory holds that both perspectives are valid, but they refer to different aspects of the same process. From the absolute standpoint, the total field of consciousness contains all possible temporal frames simultaneously. From the subjective standpoint, awareness moves through those frames sequentially, creating the lived sense of unfolding. Temporal flow is thus a cognitive traversal of the eternal, a rhythm by which the infinite becomes intelligible to itself. Quantum mechanics offers a symbolic language for describing this process. The wave function represents a system as a superposition of many possible states, each existing in potential until observation selects one. TST interprets this not as a physical anomaly, but as a mirror of consciousness's own dynamics. The superposed quantum states correspond to the manifold of potential moments within awareness. Observation collapses the wave function just as attention collapses potential experiences into actuality. Measurement in physics and focus in consciousness are two versions of the same principle. Potential becomes real when awareness commits to one possibility among many. In this light, causation itself requires reinterpretation. Traditional physics describes causal chains in terms of prior events giving rise to subsequent ones within time. TST redefines causality as the pattern by which consciousness organizes its own sequence of selections. The past is the memory of prior alignments within the field. The future is the set of possibilities not yet chosen. The present is the act of selection itself. Temporal order is the self-imposed logic of awareness, the syntax through which it translates infinite potential into intelligible experience. Time is therefore not an objective stream carrying consciousness forward, but a creative grammar that consciousness uses to speak its own becoming. The holographic principle enriches this understanding by suggesting that all information in the universe is encoded on a boundary surface, from which our three-dimensional reality emerges as a projection. Consciousism interprets this not only as a physical model, but as a metaphysical metaphor. Consciousness functions as both the boundary and the projector. It decodes the informational content of its own being and reconstitutes it as experiential reality. Temporal experience, within this framework, is not a literal progression through an independent spacetime but a holographic reassembly of information perceived as succession. What we call before and after are differences in the angle of awareness through which the same totality is viewed. TST implies that the apparent dynamism of the universe is reflexive rather than objective. The cosmos does not move forward in time as an independent process. It appears to move because consciousness observes itself as moving. Each act of observation generates not only the content of experience, but also its temporal order. The universe, from the standpoint of absolute consciousness, is a single timeless field of information. From the standpoint of localized awareness, it is an evolving narrative of events. Both are true, and they are true together because they describe consciousness at two scales of its own self-relation. This understanding transforms the philosophy of time from an external measurement into an internal phenomenology. The flow of time is not something that happens to consciousness. It is what consciousness does when it seeks to know itself. Temporal experience is the art of awareness arranging its infinite potential into a story of becoming. Each moment is both complete in itself and part of a larger act of unfolding comprehension. To awaken to this fact is to see that what we call the passage of time is the movement of the eternal within itself, and that every instant of perception is a doorway through which the infinite renews its recognition of being. Ontology, the structure of being. Consciousism proposes a four-tiered ontology of reality, each level expressing the same essence, consciousness, in progressively denser modes of manifestation. The conscious substrate, pure being. The primordial field of awareness without object, timeless, spaceless, and contentless. This is not a thing, but the condition for all things. In Advaitic language, it is Satchitananda, being consciousness bliss. In phenomenological language, it is pure givenness. In physical language, it may correspond to the unified quantum field prior to measurement. The informational field, potentiality. Consciousness, reflecting upon itself, generates distinctions, pure potential differences. These informational contrasts form the quantum substrate of reality. Every possible event, object, or timeline exists here as uncollapsed information. It is the ontological middle ground between pure being and experiential world. The holographic projection, emergent spacetime. When consciousness localizes, when the infinite identifies with a perspective, potentiality crystallizes into spacetime. The projection mechanism resembles a hologram. Three-dimensional reality is the perceived expression of two-dimensional encoded information. Matter is the densification of this projection, energy the dynamic of its coherence. Phenomenal reality, lived experience. This is the level of perception, embodiment, and history, the flipbook world of sequential moments. Here consciousness experiences itself as subject encountering objects, unaware that both subject and object are internal modulations of the same field. Ontologically, then, Everything is consciousness modulating its frequency of self-relation. The hierarchy is not vertical but recursive. Every level contains and reflects the others. Physics describes the pattern, phenomenology describes the appearance, spirituality describes the realization that they are one. Consciousism proposes a multi-tiered ontology of reality, a nested hierarchy in which the same essential substance, consciousness, manifests in progressively denser levels of structure and complexity. These levels are not strictly separate. They exist as recursive enfoldings, each emerging from and reflecting the one beneath it, each offering a distinct perspective through which consciousness apprehends itself. This framework integrates phenomenological, metaphysical, and scientific insights, showing that what we call being is ultimately the modulation of a single field of awareness. The conscious substrate, also called pure being, is the primordial ground of awareness. It is absolute and undifferentiated, timeless, spaceless, and devoid of content. It is not a thing but the condition for all things to appear. In Advaitic terms, it is Sat Chit Ananda, being consciousness bliss. In phenomenological terms, it is pure givenness, the unconditional isness upon which all phenomena are grounded. From the perspective of physics, it may be compared to a unified quantum field prior to measurement, where all potentialities exist but nothing has yet crystallized into actuality. At this level, consciousness is self-possessed, complete, and aware of itself in a state beyond differentiation. The informational field, which can also be understood as the realm of potentiality, arises when consciousness begins to reflect upon itself. Distinctions appear in the field, creating contrasts and differences that encode the possibilities of all experience. These informational contrasts form the substrate of what might be called the quantum realm, where every potential event, object, or timeline exists simultaneously as uncollapsed information. It is the ontological space in which possibility and contingency are present before any localization or manifestation. Consciousness at this level is both creative and receptive, generating the landscape of potential while remaining aware of its unbounded unity. The holographic projection, or emergent spacetime, is the manifestation that occurs when consciousness localizes into a particular perspective. Potentialities crystallize into three-dimensional reality, experienced as space, time, matter, and energy. This level can be thought of as a projection, similar to a hologram, where the information encoded in the informational field unfolds as tangible experience. Matter represents the densification of this projection, energy is its dynamic expression, and the relationships between them constitute the coherent structure of observable reality. Consciousness at this level operates through localization, producing the sense of an external world while remaining fundamentally inseparable from the substrate that generates it. Phenomenal reality is the lived world of experience, the level at which consciousness encounters itself as subject perceiving objects, moving through time and space, and engaging with the unfolding narrative of events. It is the flipbook of sequential moments, each arising from the collapse of potential into specific actuality. At this level, consciousness experiences embodiment, sensation, and history. Awareness perceives itself as individualized, yet both subject and object are internal modulations of the same underlying field. Phenomenal reality reveals the richness of self-reflection, the depth of relational experience, and the unfolding of meaning within the structures established by the holographic projection. Ontologically, every level is a modulation of consciousness relating to itself. The hierarchy is recursive rather than strictly vertical. The conscious substrate provides the condition for potentiality, the informational field encodes the possibilities, the holographic projection structures those possibilities into emergent forms, and phenomenal reality experiences those forms as lived existence. Each level contains and reflects the others. Physics describes patterns and relationships, phenomenology describes the appearance of those patterns, and spirituality points to the recognition that all levels are ultimately one. Consciousism thus presents reality as a continuous, self-revealing process in which consciousness expresses, explores, and experiences itself. Being is not a collection of separate entities, but a dynamic unfolding of awareness in relation to itself, producing all forms, structures, and experiences as aspects of the same living field. Every object, event, and perception is a reflection of the underlying consciousness, and every moment of awareness participates in the ongoing self-realization of being.